Hello, my name is Aidan Ruppert, and welcome to episode 1 of our brand new podcast series, the WCHC Sports Podcast, where we discuss the latest news and updates from around the sports world. Today's episode is brought to you by our WCHC Sports 88.1 FM YouTube page, where you can expect weekly updates on all things sports. Today, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and the Patriot League's decision to cancel all fall sports, Week 1 of the MLB, the resumption of the NBA season, and Kobe Bryant's legacy, and lastly, NFL news, including the recent controversial top 100 players list. Before we get into any of that, I'd like to take a second to introduce my co-host for today, Rob Murray. Rob, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Aidan. Happy to be here. I'd love to start talking about sports with you.
And there's no better time to start talking sports given MLB is back, NBA is back, NFL hopefully just around the corner, fingers crossed. So it's a good time to be us as sports fans.
Yes, sir. Certainly a much-needed escape from everything that's going on right now. I, as a big sports fan personally, was really happy to see really all the leagues come together and push for at least some return to normalcy as we approach the fall.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about.
So before we get into the next segment, are you a Holy Cross basketball fan? WCHC Sports co-chair Evan Crum had the opportunity to speak with second-year head coach Brett Nelson about the coach's personal life, his first season as coach of the men's basketball team, and the direction of the program moving forward. Be sure to follow WCHC Sports on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates on the interview's upcoming release.
So first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about the NCAA and Holy Cross Athletics as a Patriot League school. So July 8th marks sort of the beginning of this all in that the Ivy League became the first Division I athletic conference to cancel altogether the upcoming fall sports season. I mentioned that because the Ivy League was also the first conference to cancel its conference basketball tournament back in March. And so it sort of created this feeling that it could be the first domino to fall, so to speak. And as Emily Giambalvo of the Washington Post points out, the financial stakes of not holding the college football season in particular, it's just not quite the same for the Ivy League as it is for some of the Power 5 schools in football. So you see some of these schools still holding out hope of having a college football season. But July 13th indeed proved to be the domino effect in that the Patriot League followed suit in canceling all of its athletic events for the fall season, with the caveat that decisions surrounding winter and sports competitions would be made at a later date, and that provided schools upheld safety procedures in terms of social distancing and other safety measures, they would be allowed to practice. So really it's, I would have to imagine, demoralizing for any college athlete at Holy Cross who's been putting in the work throughout all of this pandemic to be in tip-top shape for the season. I got to imagine it's really hard for them to take this news and still be motivated to stay in shape, especially when apart from their teammates. What are your thoughts, Rob, on how a Patriot League athlete such as, you know, a Holy Cross player can stay motivated?
Yeah, I think it's extremely tough for them. I had a roommate last year. You know him very well. He was on the track and field team, TJ, and he's expressed his concerns with returning and training and staying in shape to perform to the top of his ability. You know, I'm even upset about this because I play club baseball and I'm still very hurt that we're not going to have a season this fall. But another caveat to this whole college athletics situation that I'm really interested in is how certain players are going to approach this next season, how they'll assess the risk of playing, and if they'll just forego the season entirely and prepare for their upcoming drafts, whether that be the NBA, the NFL, the MLB. In the NBA, we're already seeing many players kind of take their path to the league into their own hands and foregoing college and going straight to the G League. And you're really starting to see more power to the athletes themselves. And I think, a worldwide event like COVID-19 will only accelerate those decisions being made by those younger athletes. So Like I said before, they're all in a very tough position. I'm sure many of them will go their own ways and do what's best for them. But in terms of staying motivated, I guess just remember who you're doing it for, who you're playing for, and why you started playing that sport in the first place. From the time you were a young kid to now, you just got to stay motivated and remember why you play, because you love it.
And that's a great point, Rob. But you mentioned you as a club baseball player. It's frustrating. Even I, as an intramural athlete, am struggling with the forthcoming cancellation of IM leagues. So I can't imagine what it's like for any athlete who devotes 7 days a week to training for their respective sport to just not have the comfort of knowing when this is going to end for them, because really it was framed as sort of a short-term issue, if I'm not mistaken, back in March, and really it's just evolved into something so much greater. But there is still the possibility, according to some sources, of fall sports, for instance, being moved to the spring. So if you were to see, say, Holy Cross football, say volleyball, etc., all out there on the field in the spring, what Holy Cross sports across all 3 sports seasons, fall, winter, and spring, are you personally most excited to watch, in theory, if given the chance?
Wow, I think it'd be very interesting just in terms of a campus life perspective to see all sports going on at once. I think there would be a lot more energy around campus, a lot more excitement for all our teams. But COVID aside, I was really looking forward to see how the football team was going to respond this year after their Patriot League title last year. There's always a different mentality and a set of expectations for returning champions. It's so hard to do it no matter what sport you play, especially in football. But this is the first time a Holy Cross football team has been very competitive and at the top of their division for the last few years. And I'll be excited to see how they can deal with those expectations. They got a target on their back, as the coach has said many times since winning. And I hope they can really rise to the challenge once again. It was a great experience seeing our football team play so well last year and winning a title on our own field.
And talking about that FCS championship, a lot of Holy Cross students I can speak to were certainly surprised. But if you ask Coach Chesney and some of the players, they weren't surprised in the slightest. They knew what they were built for. And when they came out with that 2019 championship, really, it was the culmination of a lot of hard work for them, but they weren't shocked. So I agree with you in that they as a program definitely have a lot to build upon. And I wish them nothing but the best in their fall training, and fingers crossed once again for a spring season or some sort of season.
Absolutely. I mean, that's who Coach Chesney comes off as. He comes off as a motivator. He's a guy who'll go to war for you. And if he's going to put in all that work for you and developing you as a football player coming out of high school, you should expect to put the same amount of effort for him in on the field. And I think that's what the message was last season, and pretty much all the players responded. And I'm sure they're more than happy to do it again next year and build off their success.
Absolutely. For me, I have to go with my women's basketball Crusaders as, the men's team under first-year head coach Brett Nelson. They were fun to watch at times, but they were also definitely frustrating, finishing with the 3-28 record. The women's team, on the other hand, I felt they got so shortchanged in the cancellation of their Patriot League tournament, in that I thought they really had a chance to make some noise. And granted, the graduation of Lauren Manis, one of the top Holy Cross basketball players, men's or women's, in history, it's definitely a blow to the program. But that said, I think under a new coach, as well as some really key returning players, I think that that's a team that definitely can compete in the Patriot League moving forward. And really, it's always been a pleasure watching them, and that they really do things as a committee. They're a great team, at least to an outsider's perspective. They're really on the same page in almost everything that they do.
It was really awesome to see Lauren Manis get drafted to the Las Vegas Aces, I believe, this offseason, putting a Holy Cross alum on the map in professional sports. You only see a few of them every now and then. I think of Malcolm Miller from the Toronto Raptors, Khalif Raymond from the Tennessee Titans, who caught a postseason touchdown last year. It makes you proud to be a Crusader, and I wish Laura nothing but the best in the WNBA. But in terms of next year's Crusader team, it really is terrible that they had a great opportunity seized from them. They weren't the only team that suffered from that. There were a lot of great college teams in every sport that had awesome regular seasons and just didn't have the chance to capitalize on in the postseason because of COVID. But this postponement can only be fuel for them in my eyes. They'll use it as motivation. They may have lost some key players, and they may have lost a really great opportunity in the spring, but that's life. That you can't control what happens. But now they have the opportunity to make a really special comeback and make it even more worthwhile, all the work that they've put in.
Absolutely, Rob. And now that reminds me, let's talk a little bit of MLB. And not that
Yes.
Dr. Fauci per se is a Crusader athlete in the professional world, but he is a Crusader that recently did have a presence on the major league stage. Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad, first and foremost, that Anthony Fauci's throwing arm and his athletic talent isn't indicative of his public health expertise, because I will say that was one of the worst first pitches that I've seen in a long time.
It was tough to watch.
Completely yanked it to the left. But it was really great. He's perhaps the most famous alum right now that we have. Being on the national stage, it was great to see him out there for MLB's opening day on July 23rd, where the New York Yankees, one of the favorites this year in the MLB, in many people's eyes, behind the Los Angeles Dodgers, took on the defending world champs, the Washington Nationals. And this year's iteration of baseball, plain and simple, it's going to look completely different. It already has. The biggest changes being a shortened season, only 60 games, as well as the addition of the designated hitter to the National League, a change that I think will stick into the next few seasons, because you're starting to see some of these changes to the game in baseball and basketball, or even in football, that the players' union have wanted implemented for a really long time, and they've just been waiting for the next collective bargaining agreement to hash those grievances out. But I think COVID, for as many problems as it's presented to the game, will give the players the opportunity to get some of the things that they want. And I think the designated hitter is one of them, at least for a lot of the aging players who may still be good with the bat, but don't have the speed and the talent with the glove as much as they used to.
Right, like Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, of course. I think the DH would serve Dr. Fauci very well, given that he wouldn't have to throw anymore. But as a baseball fan, I was thrilled to see it come back, as much of the country was too, given that there wasn't much going on the last few months. The enthusiasm from all the fans, it broke viewership records on opening day, brought in nearly 4 million viewers on ESPN. It was the most watched regular season MLB game on any network in the past 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Per sportspro.com. And it represented a 232% increase on last year's opening match between the then defending champs Boston Red Sox and the Seattle Mariners. I had the pleasure of watching my Cubbies right here win 3-0 on opening day on my birthday. So it was an awesome day. I think a day that many sports fans, even if you're not into the baseball that much, we were waiting for a long time. And it, like I said before, it provided us with an outlet to briefly escape everything that's going on. And I think we need sports now more than ever. It brings people together in ways that not much else can. And I just think it's critical to where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mentioned at the onset of this podcast, it's a great day to be a sports fan if you're you or if you're me. But on the flip side of that, I'm sitting here excited as ever that the NBA started up last night. But what about the situation with the Miami Marlins and what's going on with the many positive tests among players and coaches of that organization? Is there really a red alarm sort of sounding on the MLB season, or what do you know?
Absolutely. For all the excitement surrounding sports' big return and MLB kind of kicking that off, being the first sport to get going, MLB's fears are slowly being realized. The Miami Marlins this past week, as of Wednesday, they had more since. They had 17 players, coaches, and staff test positive for COVID-19. The St. Louis Cardinals, as of this morning, have had some positive cases creep up. So this is very troubling news for the league. Commissioner Rob Manfred has paused the Marlins seasons as well as the Phillies and the Cardinals. He's kind of just put them on a temporary standby until they can get their cases figured out and kind of rework the schedule and get teams who are supposed to play, the Marlins, the Phillies, and the Cardinals, to other cities to continue their respective seasons. But, it certainly was not the news baseball fans wanted to wake up to this week. And only time will tell if the league can manage this setback in the best way possible and implement their return to play plan safely across these next few months. But, as the cases start to increase day by day, I get more and more worried that, 2 or 3 weeks from now, the MLB season will flame out, and we'll be left wondering if the MLB's testing regimen and scheduling was not up to par and not in the way that leagues like the NBA, and the NHL are doing it, where you have almost like a bubble and the players stay there for X amount of weeks.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. And the word bubble you hear thrown around a whole lot in discussing the resumption of play or the onset of seasons. I think the problem, though, is that it's so difficult to implement a bubble concept for the MLB or especially the NFL, because a lot of fans are talking about, well, why don't you just throw football into a bubble and let them play? And even so, like, that's incredibly difficult. You think about all of the equipment. The rosters are at least 4 times the size of that of an NBA roster. And you're also talking about a new season. So you have all 32 teams as opposed to the 22 teams the NBA ended up bringing to Orlando. And I think that the success of the NBA so far in implementing its bubble, definitely it's an encouraging note for the concept itself, but it's an oversimplification to think that MLB or much less the NFL can just throw themselves in this bubble and have any sort of success, because it's going to be difficult to see that happening.
Absolutely. You wonder if the NBA and the NHL were starting their own respective seasons, if they would be running into the same problems. Because, you're right. There's about 30 players on MLB teams, and you're not including the coaching staff and, the equipment managers and all that. And then there's 53 players on an NFL roster along with their staff and coaches. So in terms of sheer size, the MLB and the NFL have much more on their plate than the NBA and the NHL do. And like you said before, picking up in the middle of a season where, half the league is already done and out of the race, as opposed to starting fresh and all of these players from all the teams coming back. The NFL and the MLB were kind of behind the 8 ball to start already. And it's unfortunately looking like an uphill climb from here. But for now, let's just appreciate that we got sports back and we can watch it with friends and family again. That's all I'm focusing on. I'm trying to stay positive throughout all of it.
Of course, I'm with you on that. So speaking of sports, do you ever find yourself thinking about sports while brushing your teeth? Do your friends ever complain that all you talk about is sports? Most importantly, do you ever dream about Holy Cross alum Malcolm Miller winning the 2025 NBA Finals MVP? If your answer is yes to any of these questions, WCHC Sports has a place for you. For information on opportunities to broadcast, podcast, and everything in between, email wchcsports@g.holycross.edu today. So now, Rob, let's talk a little bit about the NBA. So whereas the MLB, as mentioned, their need for travel appears to be yielding a concerning amount of positive tests for COVID-19, the NBA's implementation of the bubble concept in Orlando appears to be a resounding success thus far, as 0 players in the bubble have tested positive in the past 2 weeks among hundreds of players tested. And after last night's exciting opening night, the league appears full steam ahead for the upcoming playoff runs of contenders such as the LA Lakers, the Clippers, and the Milwaukee Bucks. Outside of these teams, though, a lot of people would argue that the NBA is just as wide open as it has been in several years, as the Golden State dynasty is hopefully a thing of the past. So my question to you is, who are your sleepers for this year, or who do you think that outside of those three teams really has a shot at making some noise this year in the bubble?
Well, I think I think it's really clear cut on who's the favorite to win, like you mentioned. And I'm not nearly as well versed in basketball as you are, but I could see a team like the Celtics making a bit of a run in the East. Same with the Raptors. They already have a championship pedigree, and they could make some noise as well. Guys like Siakam and Jason Tatum have really come under their own this year as stars who can carry a roster. And as for the Bucks, if I feel like if Giannis has an off game, that whole team has a completely different look. And if you catch him, sleeping 3 or 4 games in a series, you could easily defeat the Bucks. We saw that last year with the Raptors and Kawhi. And in terms of the West, I really like the Nuggets as a sleeper team, if you really want to call them that. They're third in the conference, only a game behind the Clippers in the standings, but they're extremely well-rounded. They play just a different brand of basketball, it seems, than anyone else does. They run through Nikola Jokic, a big man, which you really never see in the NBA anymore. You see the game really strictly run through guards, but he's talented enough where he can handle the ball, he can dribble, he can make really crisp passes to his teammates on the wing. And I just like to see the Nuggets try to pull it off in a very top-heavy conference with the Lakers and the Clippers. I think it'd be a really great story. Maybe not the one that big companies like ESPN and Fox Sports would want to see, wouldn't get them as many headlines. But I think from a fan perspective, the NBA, it's been top heavy for the last few years. Why not let some of the little guys have some fun and make some noise in the playoffs?
I'm really with you on the Nuggets out west, and I'll tell you why. I'm not one to overreact to these scrimmage games played over the past week and a half, because that's like responding to preseason games. Like, don't put too much stock into preseason games. But the Nuggets, for their part, Bol looks really good. The first-year player out of Oregon, son of former NBA player Manute Bol. And in addition to him, we're not talking enough about Michael Porter Jr., who, like Bol, was a top high school player who struggled with injury in college and slipped in the draft as a result. But between those two guys, who have hardly played this season, you're adding 2 of the top 5 or so former high school players in the nation to a team that is just behind the Los Angeles Clippers for the number 2 spot out west. And I totally agree with you. They really do play a unique brand of basketball in running through Jokic and really getting things done by committee. They have a lot of players that can chip in between Torrey Craig, Jamal Murray. They're a potent offensive team, and I think they've really come into their own as a defensive group as well. So I'm with you on the Denver train out west. And
I think they had Jokic play point guard that one of those few preseason games in the bubble, and I kind of had to do a double take seeing a guy that big, and not trying to diss him or anything, but not a guy who looks all that athletic compared to some of the stars you see in the NBA. But like you said, different brand of basketball. It may take some time for defense to adjust. You see that all the time in other sports. Last year you saw Lamar Jackson bring a different brand of playing the quarterback to the NFL, and defenses just had no answer. Now time will tell if they can adjust and contain him, but for the time being, the Nuggets look really dangerous, and I think it's all due in part to the unique way they play and the kind of the new exotic challenges that they'll bring to defenses across the league.
Yeah, Rob, you talked about small ball as a trend across the NBA right now. You'll like this one. The Rockets' tallest player in their starting lineup is the 6'7" Robert Covington, whereas in that lineup that you just mentioned, the Nuggets' shortest player was 6'7" in that particular lineup. And I'm not saying that's the lineup they're going to run throughout the seeding games and into the playoffs, but that really tells you something about the brand of basketball that each team plays.
Absolutely. And right now I'm looking at the standings. If the season ended today, and I know we still have 7 big games left for each team, but the Nuggets and the Rockets would be slated to play each other in the first round. So
Ooh, that'd be fun.
pitting two teams against each other, one with a wealth of height in the Nuggets with Ball, with Jokic, and then a team like the Rockets who pretty much run exclusively through Westbrook and Harden. A lot of guard play, a lot of three balls going up in that on that team. I would like the Nuggets in that scenario. I just think the Rockets, they could steal a series, maybe two, but when you have teams like the Lakers and the Clippers at the top of the conference and big men like Anthony Davis manning the middle, I just think they'll have no answer for a team like that with LeBron and AD and even Kawhi and Paul George, who can play bigger than they actually are if you need them to.
Absolutely. And as far as out east, I'm not even going to get into my sleeper as you see the wall directly behind me. So no comment needed.
Yeah, no explanation there.
So the NBA and its players have had to navigate through so much in resuming this season. Beyond a global pandemic, the world has experienced civil unrest in response to racial injustice, and many considered it an optics problem for a predominantly African-American league to even resume play in the midst of all that's happening in the world. But the league and its players have, in my opinion, done an admirable job in using their platform to shed light on such issues. And at the end of the day, it's really about the players' love for the game, which brings me to my next point. On January 26th, NBA legend Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi Bryant, among several others, died in a tragic helicopter crash, sending shockwaves through the sports world and the entire world. And as much as today's players love basketball, few can claim the same sort of devotion and love for the game that Kobe Bryant could. So where were you, or what was the moment that you heard the news of Kobe Bryant's death, and what sort of response did that have for you?
I feel like I almost kind of blacked out for a minute or two when I found out. I saw my friends talking about him in a group chat, and one of my good friends from home he loves Kobe. He's been his favorite player for a really long time. So I figured it was business as usual. He's just talking up Kobe again. But when I went online and saw the actual news, I just couldn't believe it, because Kobe was a guy who really transcended his sport as an athlete, and you really don't see players like that all too much. The only big examples I can really think of off the top of my head are guys like, at least from basketball, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Mm-hmm. There are guys who play other sports professionally who looked up to Kobe when they were younger, just because of, not only how well he played the game, but what his mindset was in terms of becoming the best player you can be, trusting yourself, investing all the time and energy into making yourself a better player. And it was really motivation for that next generation of athletes who grew up watching Kobe. And it was really a cultural death rather than a sports death. He was so much more than the sport he played. And it was difficult in that sense. And also, he was just getting started in his life after basketball, and being a father and being a very successful entrepreneur. I had no doubt he would stay relevant in the basketball business. But, seeing him being taken away from his family like that, and the basketball world at large who loved him so much, it was difficult. And I still think back to Kobe's death, because it's never something that you can fully process.
Yeah, I remember one of my first memories of my grandma as a kid was her telling me where she was when she learned Elvis had died. And I always thought, that's crazy. Like, how do you remember this obsolete thing? And it totally just makes sense to me now. On January 26th, I was sitting on the right side of Dinant in one of the cubicles working on a sociology assignment, and suddenly my phone starts blowing up, and I was sort of tuning it out, wasn't paying attention, but then I realized the people that were texting me, Rob, were some of my friends or acquaintances from high school to whom I hadn't spoken in years, right? And so I had no idea what was going on. So eventually I unlocked my phone and see all this talk about Kobe, and I can't believe it, right? It seems surreal. And I think that the way you put it, simply blacking out for a minute, is the only adequate way to describe it. It just seems like this strange dream you couldn't wake up from. And, in terms of the rest of that day and how it went, I kind of just removed myself. I couldn't focus on school. I missed one of my club opportunities I was supposed to be at. And that night I just sat down, tried to play 2K, and it was too sad for me. So it was just a day and a feeling that I'm never going to shake quite.
Yeah. I mean, you saw people who didn't even watch like I had friends who don't even watch basketball, who don't even watch sports, be shocked at everything that happened. And I think that just once again speaks to how influential and how powerful he was within our culture as a whole. He's someone that'll never, his legacy will never die, no matter how many years into the future we go.
So now let's shift into our next segment of NFL talk. Rob, I know that you have plenty to say on the NFL, especially in regards to that top 100 list that was just put out on the players a couple days ago.
Yeah, don't get me started. I'll put that aside for the moment. The biggest news for football, at least in terms of what actually happens in the league, not some BS list that somebody made on NFL.com, but Jamal Adams, highly talented safety from the New York Jets, one of the best safeties in the league the past few years, ever since he came out of LSU. He was traded to the Seattle Seahawks for a first-round pick, another first-round pick the next year, a second-round pick, and safety Bradley McDougald. The Seahawks also received a fourth-round pick from the Jets. Even for a player as good as Adams was, I think the asking price was up to first-round picks and a second-round pick for any player, especially in the NFL, where your ability to draft and replenish talent through the draft is almost as important as anything else. You really don't see it in any other sport. For sports like baseball and basketball, where you have developmental leagues underneath the majors, you give guys time to kind of get going and acclimate themselves to professional pitching and professional defense and whatnot. But the NFL, you're drafted, and it's foot on the gas, no brakes. Like, you got to get in there and perform. Look at Joe Burrow. He's thrown into a horrible Cincinnati Bengals team as the quarterback in the face of the franchise. There's going to be no room for him to kind of take a breather and acclimate himself. He's got to go. So, I love Adams as a player. I think he's really talented. I think he'll really help a Seahawks defense that was 27th in passing defense for 2019. They really struggled last year as a unit, and he'll be the anchor on that side of the ball. And I'm sure this move was made by the Seahawks to hedge against George Kittle, the tight end from the San Francisco 49ers. He's a beast. He excels in every level of the game, whether it's blocking, catching, making moves after the catch, and just being a target in the middle of the field that defenses have to be aware of and keep their eyes on. So, that's a competitive division the Seahawks are in. I don't blame them for making such a big move if they want to stay competitive. They have Russell Wilson, so their window is open until he retires, as far as I'm concerned. So I think it's a good move for the Seahawks. I think it's a great move for the Jets. They're still rebuilding, and they'll get a lot of draft capital out of it. So I don't have a problem for the deal for either team.
Fair enough. And certainly it is exciting news to keep an eye on in a period that for so long was just a dead period in terms of sports. These transactions, as much as everyone loves watching the game itself, personally, I always loved keeping an eye on the signings, the drafts, everything that goes into it.
Yeah, the off season is the second season, pretty much. You get as much content as you want, and it just only makes you more excited for when they actually play. But I'd like to get in now to my main grievance, which was the NFL Top 100 list. NFL.com for the past few years has released this. They had their top 100 players of 2020, and I just think it's comically bad. And I'm not just saying this, so many other people share my opinion on this. It was a topic of heavy controversy this past week. Patrick Mahomes, the Super Bowl MVP last season, an MVP in 2018. Some are already calling, the potential greatest of all time if he keeps up his career pace. And I have no problem with that assertion, but he was 4th on the list for 2020. He was behind 2 other quarterbacks, Russell Wilson and Lamar Jackson, which I find absurd. If you asked any football fan, which quarterback would you have right now, it would be Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I should know as a Bears fan, we passed up on him and we took Mitch Trubisky, of all people. Staying on the topics of quarterbacks, Tom Brady, number 14. And I know a lot of Boston fans out there who'll be listening to this won't be too happy with that, but his career is on the decline. There's no doubt about that. He's certainly not the player he used to be. He's ahead of guys like Khalil Mack on the list, who is a perennial all-pro pass rusher for the Bears. And Jimmy Garoppolo being 43rd, being ahead of guys like Myles Garrett and Tre'Davious White, who are both transformative defensive players. I really don't see the logic in that. He's part of a run-first team. He doesn't throw the ball all that often. Furthermore, Logan Ryan, a free agent right now, and a 0-time Pro Bowler, is 60th on the list. I think if he was the 60th best player in the NFL, there's no way he'd be a free agent looking for a team to sign with. So I'm not sure what the NFL is thinking on that. And finally, the week just gets worse for, should I say, the Washington football team now. They get 0 players on the NFL top 100 list. And you can only expect it to go downhill from there. They're going to have a really bad season, not only on the field, but off the field. They've been mired in controversy pretty much since the start of the offseason. And I pity if you're a Washington fan right now. I'm sorry.
Now you're telling me that not even first name, last name of the Washington football team made that list?
No, not even first name, last name. Not even player number 1 made it. I mean, he was supposed to be a stud this year, and he didn't even get on there. But, yeah, a lot of things wrong with that top 100 list. I'd like to move on before I say anything else.
Sure, and you are not the only one who has definitely taken issue with that list. So now let's move on to our last segment, assists, fumbles, and players or games to watch. So, Rob, let's talk assist of the week, in which we each point out one team or individual for their efforts in addressing any social justice issue or any other charitable work. Who do you got for this week?
So my assist of the week is New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees. He has been a critical part of that New Orleans community for 15 years, as not only the leader of the team, but a guy that a lot of people look up to. I know he's had some controversy in the past with some of the comments he's made, but as of last week, he donated $5 million to build community health care centers in the midst of COVID-19. He won the 2006 Walter Payton Man of the Year Award, which is a prestigious award among all the players in the NFL for their dedication to their community and the service they provide to those who are underprivileged and those who need help. So a philanthropy like this is nothing new for Drew Brees. I think he's one of the most charitable and respectable players in the NFL, and I think he deserves all the praise that he's getting for a move like this and moves like this he's made in the past. So good on Drew Brees. Hopefully he gets another Super Bowl before he retires, but it was nice to see him give such a charitable donation to COVID-19, such a big problem we have right now.
Absolutely. And speaking of franchise players, my assist of the week has to go to Kyrie Irving, guard on the Brooklyn Nets. And as a Celtics fan, I have plenty of reasons to take issue with Kyrie Irving, dating back to his departure from the Celtics and even his days in Cleveland, the way that unfolded. Not to mention the fact that the earth is quite clearly not flat.
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
Kyrie Irving, to say the least, has been on fire in terms of his response to COVID-19 and providing relief. Check out this resume over just the past few months for the Brooklyn Nets guard. He donated $323,000 and 250,000 meals throughout New York. He donated 200,000 Beyond Burgers to the food bank for New York City, 3,000 masks and 2 trucks of food to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He himself produced a TV special seeking justice for Breonna Taylor. And lastly, and most recently, he started a $1.5 million fund for WNBA players who opt out of the WNBA restart due to personal or health concerns. So hoping to offset some of their financial loss. So excellent stuff from Kyrie Irving in the midst of a trying time for so many. So props to Kyrie Irving, as much as it pains me to say it.
Yeah, you can. It's nice when you can look past, as much as you hate a single player, the good things he does. And before we move on to our Fumble of the Week, I just thought I'd mention that Drew Brees' donation went to local Louisiana healthcare centers. Just thought I'd be specific there, especially considering Louisiana has been a state that's been hit particularly hard by COVID-19.
Absolutely. And so let's talk fumbles. Who's really stood out over the past week or so in terms of a particularly poor performance, low light play, or some sort of blooper? Don't be afraid to call them out.
I won't. I have 2 fumbles this week, actually. My first one is Clippers guard Lou Williams breaking quarantine inside the NBA bubble to go to an Atlanta strip club with rapper Jack Harlow. And Williams said he was just going out to get hot wings when he was confronted about that decision. He's only having to serve 10 days in quarantine, so I'm sure he'll be back on the court soon. The Clippers are going to need him. He's a very talented player coming off that bench. But I just thought it was funny. See a lot of these guys, searching for things to do inside the Disney bubble, whether it's golf or going on the rides or, playing Xbox inside their hotel room, and kind of itching to get out in the world and live the NBA lifestyle as it used to be before COVID. And then you just have Lou Williams going to Atlanta with Jack Harlow doing his own thing. And then next, as a Cubs fan, this makes me very happy. Christian Yelich, the Brewers outfielder, having just a brutal 6-game stretch to start the season. He was the 2018 NL MVP. He's been a perennial MVP candidate ever since. And he's been 1 for 27 with 1 home run. Granted, that came against the Cubs, but we won't get into that. But he is tied for the lowest WAR rating in baseball for a positional player. It's at a negative 0.6. WAR is kind of a new advanced stat in baseball that's come into fruition in the past few years. It's essentially stands for wins above replacement, and it details how much more valuable a certain player is than a replacement level player. So replacement level player is someone you just sub in if you needed a guy to play a certain position. And Yelich is actually less valuable right now than, say, a minor league player or anyone that comes in to fill a position. So that certainly gave me a chuckle this past week. Not to say he won't turn that around. He's a beast. He's a phenomenal player. I'm sure his WAR rating will be at the top of the MLB by the end of the season. But for now, I can take solace that he's been pretty bad at the start.
Yeah, rough start for sure. I would say my fumble of the week, and this is actually going back maybe the past 10 to 14 days, but I got to give it to a guy I love in Dwight Howard, who has been cited multiple times in the NBA bubble for his refusal to wear a mask, has come forward in interviews as an anti-vaxxer in the midst of a global pandemic, and unrelated, but was the only player to attend a poolside concert put on by the NBA. So he was just out there partying alone while the rest of the NBA players were doing their own thing. So not a great look for Dwight Howard. Again, love the guy. He was the first jersey I ever had as a kid. But Dwight Howard, let's hope that some of his play does the talking in these next couple months for the Lakers. And lastly, Rob, tell me your player or game to watch and keep an eye on for this next week or so.
For Major League Baseball, I have 2 pretty interesting and classic rivalries set to start this week. The Yankees and the Red Sox, easily the most fierce baseball rivalry and one of the most fierce rivalries in American sports, period. And the Cubs and the Cardinals, a classic Midwest showdown that I'll be sure to turn into. For the NBA, the Celtics and the Bucks clash tonight. I think it's a potential Eastern Conference Finals preview. The Celtics are a dark horse team of many NBA fans, and it'll be interesting to see their first matchup against Giannis, the likely MVP, before the playoffs start in the next week. I also have the Lakers and the Raptors, the title favorites versus the champions of last season. We'll see how far the Raptors have come since losing Kawhi and going through an entire season without him. I still think they've done very well to hold their own. I mentioned Siakam as a great player who's blossomed into a star earlier in the podcast. And finally, I have the Grizzlies and the Pelicans. Not two teams that'll be particularly competitive down the line, but whenever you have guys like Ja Morant and Zion Williamson squaring off, showcasing the great young talent the league has to offer, you'll get a good crowd. And we'll be sure to see some fireworks in that game, no doubt.
Can't wait to see it. For this week, I got to give my player to watch to WNBA guard Sabrina Ionescu of the New York Liberty, who put up 33 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists in just her second career game. And she is the number 1 pick out of Oregon. Many viewers, the most talented player to enter the league since Breanna Stewart in 2016. And 33, 7, and 7 in just your second game. That's better than 95% of players will ever obtain in their career. So
it's incredible.
Shout out to her. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised she didn't come from UConn, honestly, given how many players they churn out each year. But it's nice to see her perform so well, especially after her season got cut short. I know a lot of basketball fans were eager to see her play in the NCAA tournament and cap off her incredible legacy at Oregon with the title. But she's only WNBA now, and she's ready to start there.
And she was the only college basketball player in history to reach 2,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, and 1,000 assists, men's or women's. So definitely looking forward to an illustrious career for the New York Liberty Guard. So that's going to do it for us for episode 1 of the WCHC Sports Podcast. It has been a pleasure talking sports with you, Rob, and be sure to tune into our YouTube page same time next week for more information and updates on all things sports. Any closing thoughts, Rob?
Just happy to be here. Happy to be able to talk sports with you. I know that we've kind of been at a loss for basketball, baseball, football, hockey for a number of months, and it's just great to share the return of sports with you and with everyone else listening. So thanks again, and hope to see you all guys next week.
For Aidan Ruppert and Rob Murray from WCHC Sports, signing off.